Well, hello YouTube. We're back again for another week of Queer Confab, and this week we are discussing trans rights. Human rights, they should be universally attainable for people all over the world. However, there are still many groups that do struggle with getting any sort of rights, especially in many different countries. And there's still a fight for many of them, transgendered people being one of them. But why has there been such a hard case for the trans community? And why, especially recently, has there been more of a backpedal on these rights, especially with issues in, say, America? So that's the kind of thing we're going to be discussing today. We're also going to discuss kind of the differences between the UK and the US, and where is the safest place for transgendered people to live. So to start off with, I'm going to introduce my wonderful guest here. This is Artemis Hunter. And do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently unemployed because just kind of moving through things at the moment. But yeah, no, I started my journey maybe, give me a second here. It was about 3 years ago. I spent 2 years just kind of figuring things out before that, and then 2 years just being socially transitioned. But I didn't get to start medically transitioning until about July of last year, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, well, it's been life-changing, like that's the thing is, I think probably the most important thing that I would think anybody should take away from this is the fact that it's about saving lives.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people forget that. A lot of people just think about, oh, well, the news says this, or my friend said that, and it's like, well, you aren't living the life of the person. And it can be, it's difficult, actually. It's really interesting when you find that you're waking up in the morning and you're looking at the news and you find that there is a person out in the world just challenging your right to exist. And yeah, I think that's probably the main reason why I agreed to come on here and talk to you yourself, actually, because like people don't always get to see what it means to be the person that that's affecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not everyone can walk a mile in each other's shoes, and sometimes I think a lot of people forget that, for sure. So when you started your journey, talk me through how you kind of discovered that this is who you were.
That is a very complicated question.
I wouldn't think it
But
would be
like,
simple.
because the thing for me was I started it when I was like, well, I mean, the thing is, now that I've looked back, because you start the journey whenever you start it, and then you actually start looking back and you start realizing things about yourself that you kind of go, how did I not realize this or think of this sooner? How did this not become something that was something that I had thought about or something like that? So for me, it was after I moved to Glasgow.
Mm-hmm.
I like, what's interesting to me is the fact that like for a long time I just had no idea what being trans was about. I hadn't really anything other than some old-fashioned messages that I'd been given by people growing up. And so for me, it was actually kind of stressful when it first started to occur to me that it might be a thing, because I was like, but I don't agree with these things, or at least I didn't think I did. And so like the first part of it was, I mean, the first part for anybody is usually denial because it's way easier. But then I remember the moment when I decided to commit to the change for myself was I went to, like, there was basically just a friend of mine had set up a clothes swap, which is basically just people bring stuff that they no longer wear or use or stuff like that, and they can put that in,
Mm-hmm.
and then basically you can just take anything that takes your fancy. It's not, like, it's basically just everybody that's going is agreeing that they're not going to pay for anything. They're not buying it or anything. They're just exchanging it with each other. And everything that didn't get picked up by anybody went straight into a charity shop to be sold later.
Yeah.
And I found just, it was just a really nice skirt. And I just put that on, and I put on this cardigan thing with it. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I started crying. Because I hadn't seen this other potential person that I could be. And I was just immediately more comfortable in what I was wearing, in how I was feeling, in what I was doing. And the fact that everybody who happened to be coming to that event was also either trans themselves or was comfortable with trans people and was open to that. I wasn't like questioned or brought up on it or anything like that. And so I'd been thinking about it up until that point, but hadn't really known, where does one start? What does it actually feel like? Because a lot of people are like, what does it mean? Or what is it? How do you know you're trans? Because some people don't feel gender dysphoria. Like for some people, it's so small as to be negligible. They just know that it's not right. But it's when you feel gender euphoria for the first time, that's when you just know.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that moment, I looked at myself in the mirror and I was just like, I have not been this person my entire life. And now I'm kind of mad about it.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because I look back over my life and it's like there's more and more memories will come back to me where I think to myself, I did this when I was a kid. And that was way more a feminine thing than it was ever a masculine thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always more feminine growing up. I wanted to do dance classes. I wanted to do, and it's stereotypically feminine stuff, but
Yeah.
that was what I was in for. It was art and dancing, and didn't really like sports. Hated hanging out with the guys. Never wanted to talk about football. It just
Mm-hmm.
drove me nuts. And so I thought it was just, oh, I'm autistic. I must be just, weird and not able to fit in.
Yeah.
And then I just started talking to people who had transitioned. My friend Jasper, he's been an amazing help throughout it all, because basically just whenever I was like, I don't understand how this works,
Mm-hmm.
they would just sit me down and kind of go through it all with me and just kind of let me talk myself to, exhaustion, trying to figure things out and work out, what it was I was trying to think about at the time, or who I was, or what I was, or what I was trying to, ask. And so for the first little while, it was mostly about just socially transitioning, getting people to, see me the way I wanted to be seen. Talking to my parents was interesting. That took time because there was other stuff going on in our lives at that time. And it was like, it wasn't something that I really felt I could bring up with them for a while. And then when it did come up, it was like, there's not really a subtle way to do this because I've already sort of started socially transitioning on like social media, and that's going to get revealed to you when that comes, through. And so I basically said to them, like, this is what's going on. It's not an experiment. It's not a phase. This is what I want. This is who I am. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to go through that because my father is very old fashioned.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born in 1950 and was brought up very much by a mother and father who were of the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And at first he just didn't understand it. And he was trying to, at first he was trying to think if there was a way to maybe kind of convince me that I didn't need to do this, or, that kind of thing. But then the moment I knew I'd won him round was the moment when I sat down in the living room at my parents' house, and we'd just been out for the day or been out shopping or something like that. And he looked at me and he just went, you know what? I have never seen you this happy in your life. And I was like, and that's the part you hold on to. Anytime you find yourself struggling to understand it, that's the part you think back on, because that's what matters. Mm-hmm. Is the fact that this is me happy. And it's my entire life I've been looking for that. Yeah. And I get to be it now. And it's, it's kind of gutting that only really started when I was 28 years old.
Yeah.
But it was definitely something that, because one of the things I didn't want to do is I didn't want to be one of the numbers that then ended up getting used against a minority. Yeah. So before I decided I'm definitely going to transition, I was like, no, I am going to make sure that this is definitely who I am and what I want. And then just the more that I sort of, tried things out and spoke to people. And I remember the first time someone just, because they'd met me post-transition, post sort of social transition, they referred to me as she without even thinking about it. Like they just looked at me and saw female. They didn't like, and they just immediately referred to me with that as my pronoun rather than he. And I was just, it's just happiness. There's no other way to put it. It's just because it's the thing is, it's you've been living a life where you haven't felt that things were 100% right.
Yeah.
And you've not even always been aware of the fact that things weren't 100% right. And then all of a sudden things are finally starting to feel normal. And it's so weird how things just being baseline feels so euphoric, so good, because it's a whole other experience that you've just never had up until that point.
I love that for you, honestly. That's so sweet. Like it's so good that now you've been able to find your true self and you get to live as your true self. And for someone like me who has never experienced gender dysphoria, who's never been in that kind of situation, who's always kind of been able to just feel like, okay, this is me. I've never been able to understand it from that perspective, because sometimes you can't until you go through it. I think the only thing that I could even remotely relate to that kind of thing is mental health. People don't understand it until you go through it, or until you know someone who's gone through it. But just hearing your story and how happy you are and how content you seem to be with who you are, it just makes me happy. So I'm really glad for you. And thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that, because your story can help anyone else, who's ever kind of felt that way.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I would say to anybody who, was feeling like they weren't 100% sure is you can talk to people. You can find groups where there are people who are trans who will be willing to speak to you. And the thing is, sometimes you're going to ask a question that isn't appropriate or isn't quite right or isn't phrased the way that's right. But generally, you'll find that most of us will kind of just be like a gentle push in the right direction. We'll just be like, hey, we don't ask that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like a lot of the... It's quite funny, actually. Sometimes my dad would ask me questions because he was just trying to understand.
Yes.
And so when he's trying to understand, he'll ask a question and I'll just be like, Dad, we don't ask that one. That's not one that we ask in polite society, because one of the ones is, one of the ones that comes up an awful lot for trans people is, are you going to get bottom surgery?
Yeah.
That's nobody's business.
No.
That is absolutely nobody's business.
No.
Because the fact is, what you were doing is you were standing there and asking a person what's going on between your legs.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't ask that of anybody else.
No.
You know? And it's like, so I said to him, if you wouldn't ask it of my brother's girlfriend, you shouldn't ask it of me.
Yeah.
Because we should be essentially, for all intents and purposes, the same thing in your mind. Yeah. Because one of the things I think people get hung up on is when you say that someone is a trans woman and when you say someone is a cis woman, some people drop the cis. They just say woman and trans woman. And the fact is that cis and trans, they are adjectives. I am a woman. I just so happen to be a trans woman. Yeah. That is the type of woman that I am. That's how I got to womanhood, was through a very different journey to those who happen to be born with the gender that they associate with.
Yes.
Like, it's just the way it goes. But at the end of the day, regardless of anything else, a trans woman is still a woman.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who have, there's a lot of people who push back on stuff like that because it's new or it seems new to them, because trans people have been around for thousands of years, if not millions. We've always been part of the human race. It's just that for a lot of the time, we just didn't care. It wasn't part of, it wasn't enough of a big an effect on society to really do anything about. It was just a thing that was there.
Yeah.
And the further we get into modern society, like one of the things that I saw that was recently very important and very powerful for this is all of the arguments that are being made today against trans people are the same arguments that were being made in the 70s and 80s against gay people.
Yes.
They think we're gonna, turn their kids, or basically that we're demon worshippers or all these other silly things, and it's just like, we don't care what your kid's gender is.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's their choice. That's their domain. I say choice. It's you know what I mean. It's
Yes.
their business. And if they come to us or anybody else and say, "I want to be seen as this person," then that's what you should respect. I'm not going to go around telling other people that they should trans their gender just because I did.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is, at the end of the day, I know what it feels like not to associate with the gender that I was assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what it feels like to hate or not feel comfortable in the body that I'm in. And so the idea of forcing someone to transition, that's horrific to me.
Yeah.
Because I'd be essentially imposing a level of mental torture on someone that just doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing is, I don't want anybody to transition if they don't want to. I don't want anybody, like, because the other thing is, a lot of people are like, well, I kind of don't really feel like I associate with the gender I was born with. I don't think my sex and my gender align, but I don't want to go through transition. That just seems like, like it would be too stressful, or it would do this or do that, or I just want to be, like with some non-binary people, like they just want to be. And I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Don't do anything then. Just be you. Because like this one part of it for me is that I don't really go in for the 9 million different labels for things, but that's only because I only care about the label that the person themselves gives themselves.
Yeah.
And I only care about that label for that person, and then the next person that brings that one up. But realistically, where it lands for me in the end of the journey is that the only word, the only label that should tell you who a person is their name.
Yeah.
Because gender is a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum. It's not black and white. You pick a side and then that's you settled in for the rest of your life. It doesn't work like that. Everything in the universe is on a spectrum. Energy, light, matter, everything is varied over a large list of things, not just one set and then the other.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in the entirety of existence works that way. And so expecting people within their own minds, within their own bodies, to somehow completely run in opposition to that and be black and white on everything, it's just not going to happen.
No, the world is not black and white in any way, shape, or form, in any sense of the word. Like, there's nothing, no kind of topic that you can say, this is this and this is definitely that.
Yeah, because there is no correct answer to it. And the thing I would always say is, for each individual person, like if there is someone listening to this who is wondering, would transitioning help me?
Mm-hmm.
Then the first thing you need to ask yourself is, how do you feel about yourself now? And speak to other people about how their journey went. But also, you can try certain things out that are easily reversible. You can ask people to just try different pronouns. You can pick a new name. Because the other thing is, like, you might, if you just don't like your name, that's a good place to start anyway, because it might be, there are certain things that are said to you or certain things about you that you don't like, and you can change those. But then if you find that that's not quite doing it, or if changing your pronouns does change how you feel about yourself, then you can explore other options and you can talk to people. One of the only major things I would say is, whilst the access to healthcare in this country is not where it should be, and it is still there is still a lot of gatekeeping. Like, I had to go through the process of having a counselor, a psychological counselor, a psychiatrist, basically confirm that I knew what I was feeling. They had to basically tick a box and sign off and say, yes, no, this person is trans. And there's a lot of people who think that that's a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not one of them.
Okay.
Because if I go to a doctor who is a specialist in that field, and I talk to them and they give me all the information, and I sit there and I understand that information, and I have considered my position and I've considered who I am, and I know that I'm trans and I want to go through the process of transitioning, to then tell me I have to go get approval from somebody else is just blankly insulting.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with it for people considerably younger than me,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not going to sit here and say that nobody is trying to like do the wrong thing, because there's always going to be someone in every version of everything. I'm not like here to say all trans people are perfect, because we're not. We're human beings.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem with any debate about a human wanting to be, do, or have anything, is when you get down into the specifics of any group, whatever minority you want to pick on that day, you will find people within that minority who are not perfect or who have done bad things.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't speak for the whole, but people will try and use that. And it's like, unless it's the majority, leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Speaking to people is always the first step with whether you transition or not, and whether it's right for you. And there are people much more qualified than me to be able to tell you what things you can and can't sort of try out to see, what would help potentially figure those things out.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got friends of the gender that you're considering transitioning to, and they're of a similar size to you or something like that, you can, obviously discuss it with them and see if they're willing to like try on clothes and stuff like that. Because the other thing is, for me, as I say, my personal experience was the first time I was called my correct pronoun for me without the person having to be corrected, and the first time I wore gender affirming clothing, those were the things that concretely cemented for me that I knew what I was doing, and that I knew finally who I was. And I mean, it's you'll never fully settle on that. I think that's the other thing, is no one is 100% who they are until their story is completely told. Because you'll always learn something new and you'll always find something interesting. Because one of the things that gets me is, like, I'm now 100% convinced that I am a female with all the feminine tendencies. Sometimes the way I put it is I kind of go by she, they, because sometimes I'm just too tired for gender that day, which sounds a little bit silly. And it's the way I deal with it is it's a flippant way of basically saying sometimes the person I am just doesn't associate with anything some days.
Okay.
And part of it seems for me to be, it might just be that those are the days that I'm most depressed, in which case I don't really feel like bothering with the concept of gender, because it's just something that's like it's extra on top of survival.
Yeah.
But when I have the energy for it in myself to kind of feel who I am, rather than maybe dissociating or something in that, that's the thing, is I don't want to claim to like to mental health things that I don't necessarily have, because but basically when I'm at my worst mental health wise, which I haven't been for quite some time now, it's all like basically since I started medically transitioning and actually taking hormones and stuff like that, it's basically just been a slow upward curve. And like, I can't guarantee it'll be like that for everyone, but for me it's happened to work out that way. But it is, like, the fact is, at the end of the day, estrogen has made the difference that I feel emotions a lot more than I used to.
Yeah.
And that feels right and normal to me. Like, the fact that, like, basically when I was a kid, I used to cry at movies. Then I hit puberty and I started learning to man up and, be a man. And I sort of stopped doing that. And then as I got older, I started being like, but I kind of feel like I feel like I want to cry at this.
Mm-hmm.
Or I feel like I want to be happier about what's going on screen and stuff like that. And it just wasn't happening for me. And then I started to transition, and suddenly I was engaging with both fictional and real and non-fictional media
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I hadn't in years. And it was just, I don't know, just it. Yeah, like I've rambled enough, I think, on that one. But basically, it's about asking the right questions and knowing who to ask.
Yeah.
Like I would say that, yeah, there needs to be a significant change in access to medical care for trans people in this country, because the stories that my partner has told me about like how things were down in England,
Okay.
even just regular medical care is atrocious.
Yeah.
From the stories of what she specifically experienced. I won't say that everything everywhere in all parts of England is terrible, but where she specifically went and lived, it was awful.
Yeah.
And she's actually genuinely amazed by the difference up here in Scotland since she moved here. But even here, like, I had to go private for my trans healthcare because I couldn't wait. I just did not have the. It wasn't a matter of patience. It was a matter of I didn't know if I could be here long enough to wait for it, because things were pretty bad for me mental health wise anyway.
Yeah.
And then there was the feeling of having to wait to start something that I knew could make me feel better about myself and about where I was and who I was. And so I chose to go private, and I've been keeping an eye on it, and they are still like 5 years behind on the waiting list for the GIC.
Wow.
For just the public health care.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, for as long as I can afford it, I want to keep going private, because it means that there's another space that another trans person who can't afford it can take. But if I find myself in a position where I can't afford it, I do hope that, the GIC will maybe pick things up and catch up to where they need to be, because otherwise I'm going to be waiting 3 years and trying to figure out exactly how to keep my meds coming.
Yeah.
And that's a little stressful. That is something I would say to people is know what is possible and what is, just try and figure out what the difficulties are going to be and how you're going to manage those, because not everyone is going to be in a fortunate enough position to be able to afford private healthcare. And it's not been easy. Like I've been, like basically scrimping and saving and making sure that I have this every 3 months when my appointment comes up, the amount to pay for my actual appointment, and then pay for getting the medication afterwards, because since it's a private doctor, my GP won't cover the medication. So, and it's really interesting the reasons they give for it as well, because they're like, oh well, they're private doctors, so we don't know, if their qualifications actually meet the NHS standards and blah blah blah. And it's all very obviously covering their ass. And I understand to a certain extent where they're coming from, because they're trying to make sure that they're able to provide the other services that they can without getting into too much trouble or running into any issues. But at the same time, they are essentially scapegoating a minority to avoid trouble when those people need that help the most. Yeah. And the fact is, there are sort of like, for example, there's such a thing as a bridging prescription, where a GP can offer you like the minimum of like the medications for HRT. As a sort of, because as a GP, they can see the, like it's basically about weighing the pros and cons. Because obviously, if you have to wait for the GIC, your mental health is going to be in the toilet. Yeah. And there is a much higher chance of the person deciding not to stick around for the wait time, shall we say, if they don't get any support in that time. And a GP has the responsibility as a doctor. It's the whole, the wonderful thing about the Hippocratic Oath is the do no harm. But if you can see that there's a way, like, because one of the reasons they won't prescribe it is because they're worried that it could potentially cause issues with the body.
Yeah.
But that could be monitored. And there's endocrinologists and other people who will be perfectly capable of keeping an eye on those things and helping with those things. That you could be referred to in the meantime, which has a much shorter waiting list. It's still pretty long, but it's much shorter than 5 years. And if they put you on the medication and that's enough to tide you over until you get through, then realistically, as a GP, they have a little bit of a responsibility to think about whether or not they should do that. And there's a lot of them that kind of just blanket say no until you point out the legislation and actually go into the right. And there's a lot of people who just don't have access to that stuff and don't know the way the system works and can't argue their case because they just don't know what they're allowed. And there are some GPs who will still just turn around and say, no, we're not doing it because it's their ass. And I suppose there's a little bit of this naive hope that people will be able to wait. Because it's like, oh, you only have to wait a few years. And it's like, well, for me, I was 28. I'd spent 28 years of my life feeling like crap because I'd hated every moment of being alive because something didn't feel right. And I'd spent the last 2 years of that trying to figure out, was it because of autism? Was it because of the fact that I'm autistic? And that explained some of it. That helped. But it was like, no, there's something missing. And the idea of sitting there and waiting that kind of time period for something like that was just insane to me. It was just not something I could see myself lasting through. Because just there were a lot of things that were not going particularly well in my life at that time. And just I've been exceedingly lucky to be able to pull them together because basically transitioning gave me the opportunity to be the person that I wanted to be. And that lightened a lot of the load that was making it more difficult for me to handle the other things that I needed to overcome. And it was getting the diagnosis of autism, getting approval to transition and go through that process and realizing who that was and how that was for me and what that would mean for me were steps that I took to basically empower myself to take control of the things that were out of control in my life.
And then here you are now.
It seems a lot simpler from the outside, but like you have to fight a little bit for it, but then the journey is very much worth it.
I mean, the healthcare system here is not the greatest in any aspect of the areas at the moment. Like, as much as I appreciate the fact that we do have access to free healthcare, it doesn't mean the system's great. We do have a lot of issues, and access to healthcare is just one of the many rights that those who are trans and who are trying to discover their true selves through their gender, it's lacking a lot. There is a lot of lack in there, and I know there is a not unintentional discrimination there.
Like it is interesting because there's a lot of things where people are like, oh, but like if you transition, you need to declare it because of A, B, or C. This particular health condition could affect you differently, or this particular medication could affect you differently. What a lot of people don't know is that until the last few years, like the last decade or so, almost all medications were almost unanimously tested on men.
Oh, I know this.
And so there's a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, but if you've transitioned from male to female, like like your doctor needs to know that because, and it's like, no, actually they need to know if you're female or trans female, a lot of the same chemical interactions going on in your body are now the same. Because one of the things that people don't understand is just how significant of a change it is. Because like, I mean, at the end of the day, I I developed breast tissue, my hair is thicker, like there's a lot of things. My body hair itself is thinner. But like, and some people well, I mean, you mentioned earlier that we might potentially get onto the topic. When they argue about trans people in sports, I have lost significant amounts of muscle mass since I transitioned, because I no longer have the testosterone to support that muscle mass. It's just not there anymore. I can still lift a heavier thing, but that's because of the fact that I put in the effort to be able to do that. I now have to put in the same amount of effort as a cis woman would have to put into bulking up. I would have to work out as much as the next woman would to be able to put on muscle mass and to be able to make myself bigger. I cannot make myself bigger at the same rate as a man because I don't have testosterone anymore. I have a female level of testosterone in my body, and I aim to keep it that way because honestly, like some people, like for people who, and this is the thing, is I don't ever want to demonize any gender, because at the end of the day, I hated being a man, but there are some people for whom that is the most fulfilling thing in the world to be. And all power to them. You can have the testosterone, buddy. I don't want it. You know, like, keep it the hell away from me. It ruined my life for nigh on 30 years, like I'm good. I've had my fill of it. I'm good.
So just because you brought up the whole trans women in sports, or I also not forgetting trans men in sports as well. So there is that big argument with the chemically and scientifically there are a lot of differences between those. There
is an argument for example, if someone spent their entire life as thinking they were cis male. And they worked out and they worked really hard at working out and they built up all that muscle mass. And then they transitioned to female, but they kept up that sort of workout routine. They would potentially have, a basis upon which they might have been a little bit stronger or a little bit, ahead of the curve. But then subsequently, as everybody else ages up and continues the training program and stuff like that, they're all going to plateau about the same place. Because one of the things that gets me is the Olympics went through, and this was I think it was 20, it was oh God, was it 2012 or was it earlier than that? I can't remember off the top of my head because I would love to be an expert on all things trans, but funnily enough, there's a lot of information. It's not possible.
We're just two people having a conversation. None of us are experts in anything.
In the early, I want to say it's the early 2000s, the Olympics and the Olympic Committee went through a crap load of effort to basically do the research to figure out what was appropriate with regards to trans people taking part in sports.
Yeah.
Because they needed to know, basically, does a trans woman have a biological advantage over cis women in their sport? And the fact is that because of the length of time that transition takes and the amount of time that person is not allowed to partake in the sport until such time as they've transitioned and their transition has progressed far enough that they're now sort of biologically indistinguishable, if you will, from cis women. By the time that's all done, the amount of time that they've spent not being able to partake, not being able to be in the sport itself, they've fallen behind. They don't have an advantage, they have a disadvantage. They've got work to do to catch up. Because last year, there was a news article about a university swimmer, and she outclassed everyone in her year, and she was trans. And so everybody went, see, they have a biological advantage. She outclassed everyone in her year in her uni. Everyone else at the same level across the country, she was below average. That uni's particular swim team, I guess they're just not that great. They're not going to be world class unless they put in a lot of work, basically. But the idea was picked up because it's oh, look how much faster she was than everybody else in her the performance that she was doing in her like league, but it's like her league is like 8 leagues below, I think that's an exaggeration, but like, she is miles away from world class.
Yeah.
And she's being treated as if she's at the pinnacle of the sport and is the epitome of everything that is wrong with sports today with allowing trans people to participate. And it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of effort that goes into working out the specifics. And, like I said, trans people haven't just appeared. They've just appeared in the media. The media is making a big splash about us right now. We're the hot topic.
Yeah.
And we fucking hate it, by the way.
Yeah.
We don't want to be the hot topic. We don't care to be spoken about on every new morning show that comes out. We just don't care. We don't want to hear it. Because the fact is, what we want to do is live our lives calmly, peacefully, and just along the line with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the fact that, like doctors had to put in the time and effort to figure out whether or not it was even feasible to take the hormones of one gender, suppress those, and then give the hormones of another gender. We had to figure out, first of all, the kind of medications to even be able to do that, because hormone replacement therapy is not just for trans people.
Mm-hmm.
Hormone replacement therapy exists for a number of different conditions, including like thyroid issues and stuff like that, because there are conditions that people have where their hormone levels will be affected by a condition, whether it be genetic or a medical issue or an illness. It can affect them. And so doctors, first of all, just for people who were cisgendered and had a hormone issue, they needed to figure out, how do we manufacture hormones? How do we create, essentially either synthetic, or how do we harvest hormones from one place and put them into another place? And so they already figured out how to do that, and they figured out how to do it safely. And then they figured out if, like there's an issue of, and I mean, like in the case of Alan Turing, he was chemically castrated for being gay,
mm-hmm.
which is, he was given HRT. He was given testosterone suppressing drugs, but he was not given estrogen to balance that out.
Yeah.
And that would have been forcing him to transition anyway, so that would have been just as wrong. But the fact was they suppressed his testosterone levels, and this is the part that is interesting, is the fact that if you have low testosterone and low estrogen, low of both, so that you don't align hormonally with either gender, it has a massive negative impact on your mental health, which is, of course, why in the end, because of the fact that he was demonized for being a homosexual and he was being forced to undergo a chemical procedure that was essentially driving him into further and further despair, Alan Turing eventually took his own life.
Yeah.
And that was for being gay. And we've moved past that. There are some people who still argue that being gay is just as bad, but it boils down to, we've moved past that for gay people for the same reasons we should have already moved past it for trans people. Because we're not out to harm, affect, or change things for anybody else. We just want to be comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah. You just want to be treated like a human being.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And me being a human being. Because the fact is, if I didn't tell you I was trans and you assumed I was a cis woman, you would be 100% comfortable with me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people would be comfortable with me. And then you find out I'm trans, and a lot of people nowadays in this country would still be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some that would be like, oh no, suddenly that changes everything. And I'm like, okay, but why?
Yeah, why not?
What is it specifically that has changed for you?
Mm-hmm.
Because realistically, the only thing that's changed for them is now there's an unknown factor, which is they don't understand it. And so they feel they have to question it and pull it apart and either figure out how to understand it or other it so far that it just isn't allowed anywhere near them.
Yeah.
And the thing that really kind of annoys me is the fact that it's really difficult to have conversations with some people about these issues because they are scared, but they won't admit that they're scared. Because the second you say, no, it's just new information, it's frightening to you, they go, I'm not scared, I'm not frightened. Why would I be frightened? I'm a grown up. And it's like, just, that's, or you tell someone that they're wrong. It's very difficult to have these debates, because when someone says, oh, it's XX and XY, and that's the gender chromosomes, it's basic biology. That's why we have advanced biology. It goes further than that. That's why you have to study extra years to become an endocrinologist or a gynecologist or any of those other things, because the basics aren't enough to understand that. Because when you're first taught about atoms, you're told that like the first concept of them was as a solid ball. And then you break it down to it's the nucleus and then the little electrons flying around the outside. And then it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's protons and neutrons, and those are made up of smaller parts. And the electrons, they're not really particles. They're more just sort of theoretical field of stuff. And it's like, it makes less and less sense from the outside perspective, but you have to be introduced to it in stages so that you can cognitively kind of break things down into their little bits. And the fact is that it's very difficult to have a conversation about trans rights in good faith with a person who will consistently throw out their accepted reality when it is they have the very basic building blocks of the information that you could then add to bring them to an understanding of where we're at. And the thing is, at the end of the day, it's one of the most frustrating and exhausting things about being trans is a lot of the time you're kind of expected to be an expert on these things to be able to argue it. Because the fact is, you tell someone, no, they've done studies on this. They go, oh, well, where are the studies? And it's like, I don't keep them written down in a notepad for you.
Yeah.
Because my life is, I'm living my life for me. I'm not living my life to constantly go around telling transphobes, here's a list of sources to go and read. When, especially because of the fact that if I then did subsequently come back with a list of sources, I find that a lot of the people who are most aggressively telling me that I'm wrong, I provide them a list of peer-reviewed old-ass studies, of which there are multiple studies of the same thing to prove that they come to the same conclusion. I'm not going to read them.
No, no, they're not.
They're not going to. So it's very difficult to have a conversation with someone in good faith when you know that they're looking for a way to tell you that you're wrong. Without the adequate information to back up that point. And they'll use, oh, well, there's always the percentage figures of this and that and this particular, and they'll misquote or cherry pick examples that prove their point, whilst ignoring all the
other examples
broad,
that were actually there.
The broader actual case. Because there was a lot of like people talking about how the rate of suicide in trans people was really high. But what they kept missing out was that the rate of suicide was that high in people who were not getting access to trans healthcare. And that as soon as those people got access to trans healthcare, the percentage went skyrocketing down. It just completely plummeted right down to next to nothing. Because the fact is that you take away the thing that is hurting someone's mental health, then they no longer start to think of that as an option, because the problem has been resolved, because it's a problem that causes mental health, because mental health issues are almost always a symptom of something else, whether that be a chemical imbalance in the brain, which there's a lot of theories on that, so I'm not going to get into it, or outside factors, whether that be abuse or bullying or problems or any of the things that can cause you to feel less good about yourself or feel traumatized or scared, or if those things build up and stick around for long enough, they can cause mental health problems. You remove those issues. You work through the trauma, you remove the abusers, you transition from the gender you don't associate with to the gender that you do associate with. And quite a lot of the time, you're not depressed anymore, because the thing that was making you depressed, the thing that was messing with your ability to feel happy, has now been removed. And it's not just a cure-all fixes everything, because there's a lot of broken things in human society. And so don't quote me as saying, oh, just transition, it will make everything better, because it won't. It might, for those who are lucky enough to have being trans being the only issue they have.
Yeah.
And if you are trans and you transition because transitioning is right for you, then it will help with that specific issue. Because if you are trans and you want to transition and you do transition, then the problem of not having transitioned as a trans person will no longer be a problem in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you've been so articulate and been able to talk about all that. Like, we've spent 50 minutes just on the first part. We've not even got into anything yet. And
I'm really sorry.
So much. Like, you've covered so much of like what we do want to bring up and stuff during this. And Tom said as well, by the way, that's why I keep looking down, because I'm making sure like if anyone's commenting or anything like that. So Tom said when we were discussing about the fact that we are just having a conversation and neither of us are experts in anything like this. We're just two people opening a dialogue and talking about these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Tom said, totally fair point. We can't all be an expert, and you're right. We are always learning. And at a base level, some people want to and others don't, which is absolutely true. And you're right. You can't just argue with people who are just completely no, and they're not willing to see the other side or the other perspective. There's no point in even trying to debate with them, because that it's not going to be a conversation. It's going to be you trying to tell someone something. They're just like, no.
They're just not interested. Because this is the thing, is like some people choose ignorance. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I find very interesting is the fact that we as a society have used the word ignorance as essentially a slur. We're trying to put people down if they're ignorant. We're trying to put people down if they choose ignorance. But the fact is, there's a lot of issues in the world, and some people, they're like, I'm fighting really hard to help people in this particular area suffering from this particular problem. Mm-hmm. And because I'm working so hard on that, I have to ignore this other minority over here. I just cannot think about it.
To deal with
because no human has the mental capacity to deal with every problem that's happening in the world right now. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was one of the key parts of because like I've had mental health issues. I went to therapy. I'm not ashamed of that, because one of the things that's most important about going to therapy and dealing with mental health issues is almost everybody has a trial with mental health at some point. Everyone will run into a problem at some point. And the main thing to do is find a way to process that for yourself. Mm-hmm. And it will make you feel better. It will help you deal with what's going on in your life. And one of the most important things that my counselor said to me was, you can't fix every problem in the world. You're just one person.
Yeah.
So if, for example, like you're seeing all these different charities down the street, pick one. Mm-hmm. Pick one, support that one, and just say, no, thank you, I'm already donating to everybody else. Because the fact is, if you don't have the money to deal with it, if you don't have the mental capacity to deal with it, you can't be dishing out your energy to everyone all the time. Mm-hmm. And so it is a good move to just occasionally just turn off.
Yeah,
and so
it doesn't make you a bad person.
Everybody chooses some level of willful ignorance. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that being ignorant of something just means you don't know it. And the thing is, a lot of people think that someone not knowing something, there's stuff that is considered to be general knowledge by groups of people. And each one of those groups has different things that they think is general knowledge. Someone from outside of that group comes in, doesn't know those general knowledge things, and are considered stupid. They're not stupid, they're ignorant. They didn't know. They didn't have the information. But if I were to tell a person, so, we'll go for the extreme example. I'm having a conversation with a transphobe, and I call them ignorant. They're going to get offended. They're going to get insulted. They're going to be annoyed at me for calling them ignorant and calling them stupid. And I'm like, no, I'm not calling you stupid. I'm saying you are without some of the facts that would help you understand where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. And I can't use that word, but that's what needs to be said to a lot of people, is they need to realize that if they want to have an opinion on a subject, that's fine. Everyone can have an opinion. But the second you start trying to voice that opinion as fact and tell other people what they are and aren't allowed to do, or you start trying to tell them what will and won't happen if they transition when you do not have those facts, you do not know that, you're just making it up or going by hearsay, then at that point you are harming people, actively harming people. And at that point, I will call you ignorant because that's what you're being. You cannot tell a person, like when people make the claims, like, oh, trans people can't take part in sports because they have this advantage. Based on what information? If they could prove and show me what information they have that proves that point, I'd back off. But the fact is that I've looked into it. I've like as much as any layman can look into a subject. But the fact is that if the Olympic Committee, the people who decide how the world's most prominent sporting event will be managed, and whether or not it's fair for trans people to take part in sports of their assigned gender versus their transitioned gender, and they've decided that yes, trans women should be allowed to take part with cis women. If those people who have spent their entire lives trying to make sure that something is balanced and fair and is the correct metric for measuring human accomplishment within athletics, and they say, with the backing of the scientists that they asked to do all of the work to figure out where baseline is and where these sort of changes upon a person's body would come in, and they say, yes, it is fair, then what does someone who the last time they looked at the biology textbook was when they were 12 years old, what authority do they have to tell other people that that's wrong? Mm-hmm. And that's what gets my back up is, and it's what makes it so difficult to have these conversations, because you have people throwing misinformation in your face. Yeah. You try to counteract it and you try to provide sources. You try to provide, alternate ways of thinking about things. And you're trying desperately to be patient and calm. And this person is attacking your existence to your face. They have no stakes for them. There's no stakes for them. They don't have a dog in the game. But they're trying to tell you that your entire being is simply wrong because of information that you know to be factually incorrect. It is one of the singularly most frustrating things. And the fact that a lot of these people are the people that are making the decisions as to who gets what rights is even more frustrating. Yeah. Because one of the things that I find that I absolutely detest is when, we saw it during COVID. Forget trans rights for a second. The government was told by health professionals and health experts and by disease containment experts what we needed to do. And the government chose to do their own plan, which was the opposite. They were told, shut the country. And they said, oh, but money. And it's like, yeah, cool. And then all those people died, and suddenly we lost a hell of a lot more money because suddenly there was no one to work basic jobs or do, the things that needed to be done. And we ended up with a massive shortage of the PPE, and they just massively mishandled a situation, which when they were given the information from the people whose job it is to know what you're supposed to do in those circumstances, told them what they needed to do, they refused to do it. They subsequently did something else. Yeah. And it is exhausting to watch the same thing happen on every single topic that's brought up. Unless it will make more money, they don't care. Yeah. Because an expert is an expert, but an expert that agrees with them is so much more valuable.
Yeah. And on that topic of people in power who do have misinformation and who do like to make laws, we're going to discuss a little bit about one of, I think, the hottest topics going on within the trans rights conversation, and that would be across the pond, across the Atlantic in the Americas. There is a few anti-trans bans being passed over at the moment. Not everywhere in America. There are some who are trying to combat what is going on. But from what I found, there are 556 bills that have been brought forward that classifies anti-trans. I think it was 106 of them have been denied. 300 odd are still active, and 82 of them have currently been passed, and that's throughout the whole of America. And these things are blocking like restrictions in gender affirming care, which we were discussing, banning restroom use by gender identity, and then the participation in sports, which we were also discussing as well. So it was just interesting to think, to look at, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that kind of that situation across there.
I'll be honest, I think I've touched on sports enough, so
Yes,
I'll probably look at the other
definitely
two.
enough. Yeah.
I think before we actually went live, I was talking to you about this a little bit, was when it comes to bathrooms, like I am now very comfortable in the fact that I have identified as a woman and I feel right in it. And especially if I'm with my partner or a friend, it's very easy for me to go into a public bathroom and feel safe. If I have to go in on my own, I get a little bit more sort of, I start to second guess it, because I'm thinking to myself, do I pass enough today? Have I, you know, like is because like I happen to have a bit of an issue with facial hair. I tried laser hair removal. It's done a lot for me. I'm very grateful to the people who did it, because it did a lot for me, but I still need to shave quite regularly. And if I leave it too long, I'm like, am I showing too much stubble? And if I'm in a dress, I'm like, okay, but then if I'm showing too much stubble, but I go into the men's room, like, and I don't feel safe at all in a men's room at all anymore. I just don't. But one of the things that gets me is the main reason for the kind of bill that says, I don't want someone going into a bathroom based on gender identity, is the concept of the safety of the people, of cisgendered people. Is this concept that trans people are this invading force that are planning on doing nefarious things and being, you know, just not great people. And I'm not going to stand here and say that, or sit here rather comfortably and say that no trans person has ever committed a sexual crime, because that's factually just a fallacy. That is a daydream that nobody can maintain. Because once again, trans people are human beings. You will look through the list of all people of all times, and there will be a group of them that can be cordoned off and put on the other side of the line that says criminal. And some of those people will be trans. Some of those people will be of other minorities. Some of those people will be gay, black, whatever, you know, like Hispanic. It doesn't matter what minority you pick. Autistic, there are criminals in the autistic community. Some of them, admittedly, not necessarily intentionally, but the fact is that at the end of the day, you find yourself a minority, you're going to find yourself a smaller minority within that group that have committed crimes. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we're all innocent, but what I am going to say is that when I go into a female bathroom and there's a concern for safety, it's a concern for my safety. Because I feel like if I walk into a public bathroom and somebody clocks that I'm trans, they just somehow know, because a lot of my friends tell me that at this point I really do just pass as the gender as I associate with. I'm not really, you know, I'm quite fortunate in that regard, is that, you know, like my mother actually pointed this out, was I had a lot of features about myself that just genetically I was already kind of predisposed to fit the bill, as it were. And I'm still thinking, if I go into a restroom and somebody notices that I'm trans, if they start to make a big deal about it, I'm the one that's going to feel attacked and unsafe. And I'm not going to lash out. I'm just going to leave. Because I don't want to be shouted at in a public place, especially not in a bathroom, because the thing is, I'm already there to do something that is exceedingly private anyway, you know, because the thing is, one of the things that people forget a lot of the time is it's a bathroom. We're going to the toilet. We're already like, we're so far from thinking about what everybody else is doing in that room, because one, we don't really want to think about what everybody else is doing in that room, and two, we're kind of busy trying to take care of business. And I think you'd find that most trans people would say the same thing, that when they're thinking about going into a public restroom, the question of safety is always about their own safety.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not 100% confident that they pass, or that they don't care, or, you know, like they've just got that kind of confidence anyway, then the person they're worried about is them. But one of the other things I find really funny is the fact that whenever they have these kind of conversations, they'll always try and pick to have the conversation with a trans person who maybe doesn't necessarily pass as well as others, which, first of all, actually, just on the topic of passing, you don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who says you do, just stop, please. It's exhausting. The fact is, at the end of the day, every single human being on this planet looks different from every other human being on this planet. You look close enough at identical twins, they look different from each other. Like, there is no correct way to look female. There is no correct way to look male.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work like that. And so the idea of passing is just ridiculous in and of itself. Because the thing is, there are so many photographs on the internet that are like, oh, this person is trans, and it's a cis person. And all the people underneath are like, oh yeah, you can totally tell because of A, B, and C. And it's like, well, actually, you're wrong. You can't tell because you're agreeing that this person is trans, and they've not been anywhere near HRT. So who's the idiot now?
I think I've seen a few Twitter feeds.
Some of them, like, it's a good way of illustrating the point, but it's also a little bit harmful, because at the end of the day, we're throwing up images and we're just, you know, confusing the issue and trying to make it, you know, like it's even harder to tell, so it's even more scary kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, just, it shouldn't be about trying to tell. It should be about leaving people the hell alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact is, like, one of the things that people say is, oh, well, we can't let trans women into a female bathroom because they might commit a sex crime. If a man wishes to commit a sexual crime against a woman in a female restroom, I can guarantee you they are not going to go to the effort of socially transitioning for every single member of their family, their friends, their social groups, and then medically transitioning for years and taking lots of medications. Because the thing is, I have to take HRT every single day.
Yeah.
That's for the rest of my life. I have to take those pills, because if I don't, I'll start to get testosterone back, and I will not be happy about that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is HRT is a lifelong commitment. And I feel fairly confident. I had someone challenge me on this, because, like, you can't possibly know, because maybe there is someone out there who's mad enough to go through the entire medical transition process just to be able to get into a bathroom. Mm-hmm. But I feel fairly confident saying that out of the 8 billion people on this planet, no one would do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, no one would go to that length to do that. Because the thing is, if a man wants to walk into a woman's bathroom to attack a woman, he's going to walk into a woman's bathroom and attack a woman. He's not going to transition just to have the freedom to go in there and not get caught for going in there. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, what you're telling me is that the sign on that door, because it has a skirt on it, suddenly that stops sexual assault?
Yeah.
There's a meme of the girl from like, it's Arthur or something, the kids show, and it's like, that sign is not going to stop me because I can't read.
Yeah,
it's the same concept. It's like, you're looking at this door, and you're telling me that someone who wishes to commit an act that is so heinous that we have to have some fairly severe penalties for it, because, you know, at the end of the day, those people are, like, vehemently hated from the moment it's proven that they were guilty of that crime. You're telling me that the person who's willing to go to that length is going to be stopped by a sign telling them that they're not allowed to go into a room?
Yeah.
I don't believe that for a second.
No.
But you're telling me that a trans person who is more scared of everybody else in that room they shouldn't be allowed in there for the potential of being dangerous.
Yeah.
Off of absolutely no former or prior evidence. It's like, it's a trans person, they were born and assigned a gender, they didn't associate with that gender, and for their entire life they've been a law-abiding citizen. But the second that they want to cross the threshold of a bathroom, simply because it does not align with the gender they were assigned at birth, suddenly they should be considered a criminal or a potential criminal.
Yeah.
This is in the country of America, where they will consistently and persistently say and repeat the phrase, innocent until proven guilty. You cannot have your cake and eat it. You cannot tell me that a person who has lived their entire life crime-free should be treated like a criminal because they're different to you. Because that is what segregation was based on. That is what so many different criminal practices and so many different legal sort of laws that have been repealed for other minorities were based on, was this concept that a person is different from me and thus I should be scared of them and thus their rights should be restricted.
Yeah.
And that's basically what it boils down to, is when we talk about human rights are the basic things that all people, all human beings should have access to. And that is the blanket statement, is a human right. If you are a human being, you have that right. It is an inalienable right. You have the right to food, water, healthcare, education, a house to live in. These are things that should be inalienable rights for people. And the fact is that they say, like, these are human rights. So then you ask yourself, okay, is this person a human? Are we talking to a human? Then they should have those rights.
Yeah.
And that's where it stops. That's where the argument stops. Are they Black? Are they Chinese? Are they mentally disabled? Are they physically disabled? Are they trans? Are they gay? I don't care. They're human. It's a human right. That's what we called them. So that's what they are. It seems almost insultingly simple when you put it in that framework. And, like, some people have this sort of discussion about, well, what about tolerance? We've got to be tolerant of people's beliefs. It's like, okay, yeah, no, I get that. And people can believe what they want to believe. Because at the end of the day, people will choose ignorance of certain subjects because they can only learn so much, they can only understand so much, they can only cope with so much. So I'm not going to tell a person who doesn't believe that being trans is correct because they don't have the information. If they're not harming me, they just don't believe it themselves, but they're not telling me not to do it. I don't care. Do you? That's fine. I don't care. Because at the end of the day, they're not harming anybody, and neither am I. And we're not harming each other. So there's no conflict there. I don't care. I'm going to choose willful ignorance about that person. I'm just going to pretend they don't exist unless I have to interact with them. And I can be professional in a professional circumstance. I can be courteous in a public circumstance. But when you start trying to say this group of people, for a reason that they cannot control, should be restricted on the rights that they should have, you are engaging in the same kind of behavior as segregationists, as, I'll go the extreme example. We're talking about the fascists in Germany in the early, through the 1930s into the halfway through the 1940s. Hitler gained power through the use and process of alienating and demonizing a minority. It was specifically anti-Semitic in that particular era. That's the part that we're all taught about with regards to the Holocaust. But it was also anti-homosexuals. It was very much anti-Black. It was basically his whole weird thing about Aryans, which, blonde hair, blue eyes, he didn't have either of those things. I don't get how that works. That dude must have hated himself. Yeah, no, he was Austrian.
Yeah,
He
I
came
know.
in from outside, took over the whole political system, made it illegal to vote for other people, and then told everybody, anybody that's different from you, we should maybe get them. We should maybe just put them in a corner somewhere.
Mhm.
And then, oh, the corner is getting a bit full. We should maybe move them a little bit further afield into another country. And then maybe we should, just kind of get rid of them
Mhm.
sort of a bit more permanently. And it was the slow creep. And that's the thing, is human beings have this terrifying ability to other someone. And that's what we like to do. Because one of the things that you'll find is a lot of the time, if a political party or a group of that are in power or people who are afraid of losing power, they will pick a minority and they will tell everybody how bad that minority is. And they will keep telling you it. And the thing is, at first, you'll be like, well, no, because I know someone from that kind of minority. And it's like, oh, well, eventually you start to kind of get to the point where you're like, oh, they must be the exception to the rule. And then one day you'll see that person lose their temper over the argument that's being made about their minority. And you'll be like, oh, wait, actually, maybe they are a little bit scary. Maybe they are a little bit dangerous. And it's this slow creep of convincing people who don't have the requisite information that this group that they don't understand should be feared. And because of the fact that we have this ability to choose willful ignorance, we also have this amazing ability to compartmentalize. And one of the things that was terrifying about what happened in Germany in the 1930s was the fact that the political party that was in power at the time convinced people, human beings, just like you and me, to treat other human beings, just like you and me, like animals.
Mhm.
And in some cases, less than animals. Because the fact is, when you look at your pets, you think to yourself, I would never let anything happen to them. And they had the same mindset because they were just people. This is the thing that people kind of get wrong about Nazi Germany, was there was a group of people, a minority within the country, that had the power, that were actually evil, that were actually, cruel, intentional, sadistic people. And then there was the majority who were just kind of scared. They just wanted to look after their own home, their own people, their own family. And they were convinced by this minority group through propaganda and constant policy change and just essentially almost mind washing, to believe that, like, essentially it got to the point where, like, Jews weren't allowed to walk on the pavement, they couldn't own businesses, they couldn't have money. And it was like, you start taking those things away from them, and it's like, well, I have money, I can walk on the pavement, so they must be less than me. Because you just start to get used to it. And it's like you mentioned when we were talking about it before we went live. With bathrooms, we have had male and female bathrooms for time immemorial. Human beings are just used to it.
Mhm.
Communal bathrooms are either something like an outhouse, something like that, or you're on an expedition, so everybody just has to dig the hole and do their business and then cover it up themselves. Those kinds of things. That's what we think of when we think of the extremes. But then what everybody forgets, what gender sign is on the bathroom in your flat?
There's one.
What gender sign is there on the bathroom in anybody's house?
None.
Which gender can use the bathroom and which gender can't? Because every single home in every single country that I am aware of, I will, hold my hands up to the fact that I've not been to every country in the world and I've not been to every culture in the world. But as far as I'm aware, especially if a home has only one bathroom, everybody can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact is, there's nowhere else to go. And the fact is that when it's one person at a time, it doesn't matter who's in the cubicle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if people are so scared about gender neutral bathrooms or shared bathrooms, you just make it so that each and every single individual bathroom is an individual bathroom. And if you want to have only any part of it be communal, it's just the sinks.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, like you're not at any, because the thing is, one of the other problems is people are like, oh, but if there's men in a room with women where people are going to the bathroom, you know, like, oh, what if they see something? I don't want to expose myself to them. Do you drop your trousers before you've closed and locked that door?
Mhm.
Because I can guarantee you that nobody does that unless they are very desperate and very quickly running.
Yeah.
And that's usually a mistake.
Yeah.
Which most people will go to extreme lengths to rectify if they notice that they've failed to lock the door.
Mhm.
But that's the thing, is you go to the bathroom, you lock the door, then you start taking care of everything else that needs to go on there. Then you sort yourself out, and then you unlock the door. So where's the issue of privacy?
Mm-hmm. And what I've noticed from the few communal bathrooms that I have been in, the unisex bathrooms, my college up here, they have a couple unisex bathrooms. So they've got individual male and female ones, but they've also got unisex bathrooms within the building. And from what I've noticed is that it's not like going in through a door and then there's the bathroom, you know, it's not closed off, it's open. And then the only thing that is actually closed off is the stalls. So that's all fine. And then there's a restaurant here as well. Like they've got male and female stalls, but the sink area is communal. So you come out and both male and female are in there. And so far, Nescal's had that for quite a while, and I've heard nothing about any issues or any assaults or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that is with not just trans people, but cisgendered male and female as well. And there has been nothing so far that's been highlighted. I can't say that for everywhere, but close to home, I've not heard anything like that. I can understand to an extent when women get a fear, mostly when we were talking about, you know, like feeling vulnerable, and because like it is a very vulnerable space to be in.
It is, yeah.
And I think that could be one of the main issues of why people quickly go to, or cisgendered women who seem to have the issue, or the same with men, why they quickly go to, oh my goodness, but that's not a fear of trans women. That is based on a fear of men.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that I found very interesting is, like, one of the things that we know as a society is, I think it's something like 1 in 3 women has experienced some variation of harassment or sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's 1 in 3. 33% of women in this country have experienced some form of sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a perception there, because you don't know a person. If you're in a room with a stranger, you know nothing about them. You can look at them and you can assess them based on that look, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is that the issue is being skewed in the concept that it's like, oh, well, a trans woman used to be a man. And the fear comes from the perceived man within the trans woman.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to be able to just sort of say a blanket thing and disabuse people of that notion. Because the fact is, I have never been a man. I have lived my life looking like one, trying to be one. And one of the things that I found actually laughable about it was the fact that once I transitioned, I didn't actually change my behavior that much, because I suddenly realized that one of the reasons why I was so terrible at being a man was because I never was one.
Mm-hmm.
And something else that I found really interesting, actually, was the second that I had properly started moving into medical transition, my estrogen levels are up, I feel like I should. I'm physically changing in ways that, you know, make it sort of more obvious outwardly to people that I am female. I'm terrified of men now. And the thing is, they've not done anything to me. Mm-hmm. I'm not terrified of all of them, because that's not fair. But at the same time, I'm wary of them in a whole new way that I wasn't before.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't a potential target.
Mhm.
And I remember someone saying, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, but not all men are predators. And of course that's true. But if you tell me that you're going to put me in a room with 1,000 snakes and only 15% of them are poisonous, do you think I'm going to go near any of the snakes in that room?
No, especially if you're not a snake expert. And
I
no,
mean, hell, you basically get it's like it's a corn snake and there's another type of snake and they basically look identical.
is
One
that
of them is
corn
colored
yellow?
to look like it's the same as the poisonous one, the venomous
Yeah.
one. Sorry, poisonous means Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, they look almost identical. They're very
Yeah.
difficult to tell apart. If you just took those and put them all in a room,
Mhm.
even the expert's not going to go near them just in case because they can't tell until they've had a proper good look at them. And that's the thing, is it's like, I'm not, I don't think, well, I'm not going to say not any woman, because some women will just say that all men are evil because they've had bad experiences and don't really want to put the effort in to see the differences. I'm just going to stay away from all men there.
Yeah.
And, like, to be perfectly honest, like, whilst that isn't necessarily the right way to go about it, it's understandable when you've had some of the experiences that some women have had. And that's why, I understand cis women who have a fear of trans women because of that perceived masculinity.
Yeah.
But the fact is, one of the funniest things to me is if we stop allowing trans people to go into the bathroom that aligns with the gender that they associate with themselves. There are trans men who have massive bushy beards, huge biceps, because the first thing that they did when they started to get testosterone into their body was to hit the gym.
Mhm.
And they embodied everything about themselves that they could make masculine. And they've worked really hard on making that body happen. And they're huge with massive beards. And you're telling me that they have to go into the woman's bathroom. And you're telling me that that's going to make people more comfortable.
Yeah.
And the fact is, like, there is that whole thing of like, oh, well, what if someone says that they gender identify differently just to be able to go in there? It's like, well, okay, yeah, someone might do that, but that's not a trans person doing that.
No.
That is someone using an excuse to do that. And it's like, oh, well, then if they can use the excuse that they're trans, even if they're lying about it, then trans people shouldn't be allowed to, because it encourages people to do that. And it's like, again, we're back to the argument of, you're telling me a sign on a door is going to tell someone that they're not allowed to do something and that's going to stop them from doing it.
Mhm.
It's like, if someone's determined to trespass and they see a do not trespass sign, they're going to walk past it. It's not, because if someone is pretending to be trans to get into a place, then there isn't a trans person committing a crime.
No.
And to punish trans people for the actions of someone who is not trans is completely backwards. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. It's like punishing all Christians for the Ku Klux Klan. Do we do that?
No, we don't. And that's the thing is, a lot of Christians would say that the Ku Klux Klan aren't Christian because of the fact that they don't follow the love thy neighbor and all those other kind of like rules that they try to push for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that there's some people within Christian communities who will look at fundamentalists like the Westboro Baptist Church, Ku Klux Klan, and stuff like that, and they'll say they're not Christians. And there are other Christians who I have a little bit more patience for, because I understand the trying to deny those groups. But there's other Christians I've come across who will say, no, they are Christians because that's their faith that they proclaim to be and they practice, but they are bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, one of the things I find kind of interesting is the people who are like, we need to pray for the people who are lost, not the people that are saved. Because I'm not particularly religious myself, but if you're a member of the congregation and you're saved, then you're kind of not really in the group that needs to be worried about. The people out there that aren't saved are kind of the people you need to be praying for, because as a Christian, you want people to be Christian so that they can get into the light of the Lord and stuff like that, as you know, kind of their feeling on that. I'm not here to say whether they're right or wrong. I don't know. You can't know. I'm kind of jealous of people who have faith, because I don't, and I don't know how to have it. I'd love to have it. Sounds like it's, you know, like really fulfilling for people, but it's just not something I have. I'm one of those sticklers who needs evidence for some reason.
Yeah.
But the messages that I like, that I hear from them, that I find myself agreeing with and finding to be good, is when they turn around and say they are Christians, but they've got the wrong idea, and we need to kind of help them come to a better understanding of kindness
suit their ideals rather than.
Because this is the thing, is the book has been rewritten quite a few times. It's been translated a couple of times. And there are words that have been mistranslated. There are words that have been purposefully mistranslated. There are words that mean two different things. There are words that have been translated as one thing. And then there's one where it's like, I think the word for rib is different in Genesis. The Hebrew word that they use and translate to rib is different from the word that they use to translate as rib elsewhere in the Bible. Because, well, I'll not get into it because we're not here to discuss Christianity, but the fact is
we are next week, though. Next week is our religion podcast, so
I'll be interested I'll tune in for that then, because I'll be very interested to hear what people have to say. But that's the thing, is we have this way of approaching topics where we will take information. I mean, it's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot right now, but confirmation bias is the enemy every time, because people want to find stuff that agrees with their own point of view, because human beings hate changing their mind. Because the thing is, not knowing something and having to change your opinion on something, having to change your approach to something, it's a really uncomfortable thing to do.
Change is scary.
Everyone is scared of change. And the fact is, you know, like, I am very interested to know what it is specifically that makes J.K. Rowling, for example, say the things that she says. What experiences has she had that have shaped the way that she thinks? Like, what happened in her past that made her the way that she is? Because human beings are 90% of who we are as people is how we are shaped by our experiences. The last 10% is how we choose to experience those things and how we choose to react to those experiences. But a massive part of it is the fact that something happens to us, especially in the cases of, you know, we were talking about earlier, women who have been assaulted by men are scared of the idea of trans women coming into a cis woman's bathroom, because there's this perceived masculinity there, of which they are now more afraid of, because every animal on the planet is hardwired that when something bad happens to them, they lock that memory in and they keep a hold of it. And then they look out for similar looking things and they avoid them. Because if we want to live a long life, we need to avoid the things that hurt us, because the things that hurt us can sometimes very much go on to subsequently kill us. And so as animals, even human beings are still hardwired to our instincts, where the little lizard brain, as people refer to it, will kick in and say, that's a danger. And for women who've been sexually assaulted, men are the danger. Not all of them, but the fact is that that's a man. That looks like the thing that damaged me. That looks like the thing that hurt me. I want to stay away from that. And so it's the same across all experience. If something bad happens to us, we try to avoid similar things. And if something good happens to us, we try to seek it out. And so long as our perception is whether something was good or bad, rather than just it was a thing that happened, then we're always going to be affected by that experience. And one of the most powerful tools that counselors will try and give people is the ability to see an event as neutral. It is simply a thing that happened to you, and how you then respond to that changes how you then will act in future.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, not every event is going to be neutral, because at the end of the day, an assault on a person is always going to be a negative thing. It's always going to be a negative experience. You're always going to want to avoid it happening again. But you can manage how that affects your perception of other people.
Yeah.
What I'm interested to know is what experiences have shaped the way that people like J.K. Rowling think, so that she will ignore all of the information and all of the facts and all of the science that people have tried to put across to her, and all of the counter arguments that people have given to her. And she will continue to ignore it. And she will say, no, trans equals bad because I say so. And it's like, okay, you don't want to change your opinion. That's an uncomfortable journey for you to go on. Why? And that's the thing, is it's the why that will really help any person who is scared, confused, or unsure of who trans people are, what trans people want, or what a trans person is. That's what's going to help them come around to seeing things from a perspective of, that's just another human being, and as long as they're not hurting anybody, I shouldn't care what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to say we've got there with gay rights. I'm not going to say we've even got there with civil rights for people of color.
Mm-hmm.
We still have a long way to go. But the fact is, there are going to be perceptions and stereotypes of every single kind of human being. The best thing that we can try and do is manage those and try and keep everybody in an equitable position. And this is something I actually had a discussion with my brother about, because I'm not entirely sure how much I can say about it, because it was to do with security. But it was to do with a process to do with trans people and security. And it was basically, like, how do we do security but not infringe on what makes a trans person comfortable, but also not, breach that security procedure. It was a very interesting discussion. It was a very interesting thing to sort of be asked my opinion on. And I can't really say much more about it than that, because I don't know where the confidential stuff starts, because as security processes go, you're not really supposed to discuss them, because then people can try and figure out ways around them. And I wasn't even really shown that much about the actual process. It was mostly just, who does a trans person go to in that situation, kind of thing. But when you're in that situation, you want it to be equitable. A lot of people talk about equality, and it's not always that simple, because like, for example, if you've got a disabled person, if you make everybody go up ramps, well, that lengthens the journey for people who could have taken the stairs. And if you only have stairs, then the people in the wheelchair, they can't get up the stairs. So you can't treat everybody equally in that situation, but you can make it equitable. So you've got a staircase for people who can use it, and you've got a wheelchair access ramp for people who can't. And then that is equitable, because both people can get to where they're going, and nobody is being left out, and nobody is suffering. And there are some really interesting, like, new designs of things for, like, staircases where the wheelchair ramp is kind of like integrated into it. So it's like, we're making these things more sort of, because one of the things that's a real problem is normalizing stuff, is just having the conversation, because a lot of people are really against the idea of sex education in schools bringing up the topic of the trans issue, because it's like, what does a kid need to know about being transgender? And it's like, well, you'd be surprised, like, if I'd known when I was 5 years old that there was an option for me to go to school in a skirt, I might well have taken it.
Mm-hmm.
And I might have figured out I was trans way sooner. And I might have lived a much different life to the one that I'm living now.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I wouldn't change that is because of the fact that if you change too much about the story of my life, then I wouldn't end up in the places that I am now.
Yeah.
And currently, where I am is in Glasgow, in a comfortable-ish flat with my fiance, who is the love of my life. And I would not change that for the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was a chance that I could have lived a happier life as the gender that I was before, but I lose her, nah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good, thanks.
I'll take all the trauma.
I'll take the trauma. She's worth it. Yeah, no, it's literally the thing is like, you know, and that's, you know, like I'm very lucky to be able to say that, like, because, but like that's just the person that I met.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people for whom the opportunity and the information should be there.
Mm. And I think,
and I'm not saying, you know, like, because the thing is, like, some people are like, oh my god, but like they're you know, trans people are trying to get children onto HRT, and I'm like,
no, that's not what.
No, that is incredibly dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fact is, the human body reaches puberty at a certain age.
Yeah.
And if you start messing with things before then, you are going to do irreversible damage to a human body.
Yeah.
Because there is a certain amount of testosterone, there's a certain amount of estrogen within the human body from the moment we are born.
Yeah. And it
because
develops over time.
We share blood with our mother. The you've had a child, so you might placenta. Sorry, it's like it transfers. I don't think it actually transfers blood, but it's so thin that basically chemicals and other stuff, and if you drink alcohol, you smoke cigarettes, you do other things like that, that's going to cross the placenta, it's going to cross the placental wall, and it's going to affect the child. And so there's a lot of changes that pregnant women are expected to make or are asked to make for the sake of the fetus, because of the way that that'll affect them. Hormones are one of them. One of the reasons why pregnant women become so differently hormonal is because they are providing hormones for themselves and for the baby. And so it's completely changing the hormonal balance of their blood. And that's why pregnant women can end up being either, you know, significantly more emotional or seemingly more irrational, or there's postnatal, postpartum depression.
Hair can grow at different rates, nails can grow at different rates, etc. It's
and you know, like, and these are things that people just don't know. And the fact is, one of the things that gets me is people are always like, oh, well, why should, you know, trans stuff be talked about in classrooms? I'm like, but we don't even talk about periods in school a lot of the time. And especially not to boys. Boys aren't taught anything about periods.
No.
Interesting thing I didn't know until I started my medical transition is, whilst I don't have the appropriate equipment to do the whole bleedy thing, the hormone imbalance part of periods,
you get all the extras.
Still happens.
All extras.
So I still get cramps. I still get, you know, like all sorts of really interesting
mood swings.
Sort of, oh god, yeah.
They're fun.
Oh, I can be such a grumpy bitch when I'm on my period. It's mad. I didn't expect it at all. And in the last couple of months, like, I've like started to reach, like, because they started me off on a very small dose of estrogen and a very large dose of the testosterone blocker. And then they slowly broke down the testosterone blocker because it was more effective than it needed to be. And they started raising the estrogen because they start you off at a lower level and then build it up until you hit an average for a woman of your sort of body type and size and stuff like that. And they do that to basically simulate puberty, because it can actually, if you just jump straight to the max dose of estrogen for you, you can actually end up not really developing certain parts in certain ways and certain things in the way that you should. Which means that the first couple of months are rough because your testosterone is low, your estrogen is low, your mental health can kind of take a bit of a dive. So you need to be really careful for a little bit because it's difficult. It is mentally draining. But then you start to come out the other side and you start to build up the estrogen and you start to feel more and more like yourself. and you start to feel more and more how a biological female, because that's not even the right word, but like a trans woman will start to feel more and more what a cis woman has felt her entire life. And chemically, you get to a point where everything starts to function the same way. You know, and it's wild.
It's interesting what you said about how it like basically puts you through puberty, which again is like, why would then transgender people want to put kids through that when they're not meant to be hitting puberty yet as well?
Yeah, exactly. You know? And some people are like, oh no, but puberty blockers are so, you know, evil. And it's like, actually, they're like, I won't say they're harmless, because every kind of medical intervention that changes something in your body, there is always going to be someone in the world who's going to have some kind of negative reaction to it, because biology loves a drama queen. It's just how biology works. Is there will be someone who's an outlier or some. We can make medicine as safe as possible, but the fact is, we have incidents of the human race where a very small minority, we're talking less than a percentage, are so allergic to anesthesia that it'll kill them. But it's the practice is to use anesthesia to help people with, you know, surgeries and stuff like that. And, you know, like there are people who are allergic to penicillin, but penicillin is like our bread and butter for dealing with basic infections and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like we make a process and then we have to try and sort of work around the people that lie outside of that. But the fact is that trans people are already such a small percentage of the world's population that the idea of trying to curtail those people from something when the health benefits massively outweigh the minuscule risks is kind of ludicrous. If a child has a significant enough reaction to puberty blockers, then they should absolutely be taken off them. That makes no sense. Don't risk a child's life over, you know, something that can be dealt with in another way. But at the same time, don't force a child to go through the puberty of the wrong gender for them, because that is so traumatic. Because you're watching, the thing is, you're growing up as a young boy and you hit puberty, or a young girl and you hit puberty. Your bodies are different at that stage, but until you've gone through puberty, the mass change, the mass difference between the two of you is nowhere near as significant. And puberty is an irreversible change in certain factors. For example, I don't know throughout this conversation how feminine I have sounded. I have tried, but the fact is that testosterone thickened my vocal cords. It made them thicker. That's what it does. I can't do anything about that. I can raise my vocal cords, I can raise my voice box, I can try and talk in a different part of my mouth, and you know, there's a whole bunch of physical things that I have to do and I have to focus on to make myself sound more like a woman. But if I were to relax and just let everything go back to the way that it was before, I can drop right back down to a way lower voice. And there's like so much of it is like, you know, you start building a muscle, and so you start to hold your vocal cords up more naturally and more over time. But it's work.
Like training to sing.
It's exactly the same. Singing is actually a really good way for people to learn to vocally train themselves how to speak. But it is something that needs to be like, there are vocal coaches out there who specialize in vocal feminization. Shout out to all our YouTube people who do that for us for free, or who give at least some tutorials on the basics. Because there are people out there who just do not have access to it any other way.
Yeah.
But there are, like, basically the actual physical structure of my vocal cords, unless I were to go get surgery, I can't change that. And that surgery is debatably effective. I don't know enough about it to comment on it. I won't say that it works or that it doesn't, because I don't have the information to be able to say it one way or the other. But there are people who have had the vocal shave, the tracheal shave, it's called. I believe is what it's called. And they've had the tracheal shave and it's done nothing to help, or it's made certain things worse, or it's damaged their vocal cords or stuff like that. And for me, like from what I've heard, that's too much of a risk. But I might look into it later and find from the actual, like the actual medical research that's gone into it, or medical research might be done on it in future that might change how I feel about that. I don't know. But the fact is that forcing someone to go through puberty when they don't have to, because a drug exists that can block that until they are of a legal age. And like basically there's this whole thing about, when does a person become culpable and capable of making decisions like that for themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to be perfectly honest, that's really a debate that's never going to end, because
I still don't know why I'm allowed to make my own decisions, and I'm
30 years old, and what the hell am I doing with my life? Just calm down, people. No one is ever old enough to make decisions for themselves. But at the same time, a 5-year-old does not get to decide whether they go on to HRT. That's a blanket statement. No 5-year-old gets to decide, I want to go on HRT, because you're not old enough.
No.
Your body's not ready for it. And a 16-year-old can decide that they want to transition. But if they're given time with puberty blockers to properly research it, talk to people about it, get information, not opinions, not perspectives, not someone telling them what they should do, just people telling them what will happen if they do A and what will happen if they do B. And if they find themselves gravitating to one of those choices because one of them feels right to them, then you have no right to tell that person that they're wrong. But if they're not, if it's a 12-year-old, I'm not going to give them HRT because their body hasn't even started to go through it normally yet. I would argue that that person should be given access to puberty blockers until they've been given the time and space to make that decision for themselves and have the information, the age and maturity to have made that decision. And then subsequently they can then stop the puberty blockers, in which case puberty just happens as it normally would have, just delayed. Or they can start HRT and they go through the puberty that works for them.
Yeah.
And there's just no reason not to do it like that, except in the outlier cases where someone has a reaction or there's a negative issue or, and I would always argue that in any outlier case, that should be handled in the method that will help that person, because like you get someone who's got cancer and you've got two people with bowel cancer and one of them is reacting poorly to the chemo and one of them is reacting well. Do you stop them both from taking chemo, or do you force them both to stay on it? Or do you decide that the one who's reacting poorly to it, do you try a different type of chemo, or do you try radiotherapy? And the one that's reacting well to it, maybe we'll just keep them on the thing that's working for them, Like you don't try and make a blanket statement about what is right for people in healthcare for any condition. Because human beings, one of the things that's really, really annoying to me is the fact that people say that you need to tell your doctor that you're trans because the fact that you're male or female, or what you were born as, male or female, whatever you were assigned at birth, will have an effect on how you will need to be treated medically. And to put it bluntly, that is bollocks. Because you, as an individual human being, are genetically predisposed to react the way that you will react to any treatment that is put in you. There is an average expected reaction from humans. There's an average expected reaction from certain age groups, from certain genders, from certain things, for almost every different condition that exists. But it's always tweaked to match what works for the individual.
Yeah.
Because no one person requires the exact same level of pain medication. No one person requires the exact same level of anesthesia. If you gave a 21-year-old man the amount of anesthesia that was given to a 5-year-old kid,
it's not going to do
he'd be screaming in agony. If you gave the kid the same amount of anesthesia that was needed for the 21-year-old man's surgery, the kid would die.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
just,
interesting.
you can't you cannot make a blanket statement about medicine. It can't be done.
No.
And this is why when the Pfizer and all the anti-vax, all the vaccines that were going out for COVID, every single one of them had a list of side effects as long as your arm. But the fact is, the way that side effects can be made or put onto things is like, it's ridiculously easy to claim that something was a side effect of it.
Yeah, and it's just one person that needs to have it.
Yeah, just one person, then it has to go on the list. Because the thing is, it might be that one person actually reacted to that vaccine that way, or it might be that there was just a coincidence of something that happened at the same time, but it might happen to somebody else. And if it was related to the vaccine, and they then subsequently prove that it was, they can then look to amend it to fix that problem for those who are potentially at risk of it, or they can be given a different vaccine.
Yeah.
But that's why there were different vaccines, was to cover those bases, to try and make things as safe as possible. My father had to go through a whole bunch of different things to make sure he was even able to get the COVID vaccine, because of the fact that like his immune system was so shot after all the chemo and stuff that he went through, that it was basically, if we give you this vaccine, will it make you immune to COVID, or will it kill you?
Yeah.
Because your immune system might react so violently to it because it's trying to fight off what it perceives as a threat, that it accidentally sort of, stresses your body to the point where you just keel over.
Yeah.
And they were like, we should probably wait a little bit and just kind of see how you're doing. And then he got a little bit healthier and a little bit stronger, because the particular treatments that he was on were actually going quite well. And so he ended up getting the vaccine. But there were some people that literally couldn't.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's the same thing every time.
Yeah.
With any medical condition,
much.
any medical thing, is the individual needs to go to their doctor, get the tests done, and figure out what they need. It's not a one size fits all for any human
never
being.
is. And there's so much more we could discuss when it comes to trans rights. Unfortunately, we've gone a bit over the hour hour and a bit maybe we were supposed to do, and done the 2 hours.
I'm so sorry. I rabbit on. I'm ridiculous.
But it's so much that you can't. It's so hard to fit this topic in a 1 hour, 2 hour conversation between people, because there's so much.
This is a topic that will last a lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
For anyone that wants
to, for a lifetime.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's the thing, is it's a topic that will consume the lives of people who try to fight for it. And to those people, I suppose that's probably an important thing, is for those people who are actually out there actively fighting for trans rights.
Yeah.
Standing outside of the BBC and pointing out their mistakes, standing outside of the government buildings and telling them exactly where they've gone wrong, and shouting at them to hear them, and demanding that we get listened to, because of the fact that at the end of the day, I think the last thing I'd like to say, if you'll let me, is...
Absolutely. I'm not just going to cut you off.
This is about saving lives. Because a trans person who is denied the ability to be the person that they want to be might choose to just not be here anymore.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is there are people out there who would rather their child be dead than be trans. And I'm like, you need to think about that. You need to rethink that approach, because that is... I don't think anybody actually feels that way. They just kind of hope that they can convince or change or amend the world in the way that they want to see it. And I can understand some people and the way that some people feel, because change is weird, change is scary, change is difficult. The world isn't this black and white, I know what's right and I know what's wrong, and I can just sit very comfortably in my chair and know where I sit. There are so many issues that I don't know the right answer to. There are so many parts of the trans debate that I don't know the right answer to.
Yeah.
I wish I did. I wish I could just stand there and say, I know the right answer and here's how. But the fact is that when it comes to the basics of trans rights and the basics of human rights, is we are talking about saving lives. Because there are people who would be alive today if they had been given access to trans healthcare that aren't. There are literally thousands of people, maybe more than that, probably more than that, who are no longer with us, who could have been, if they'd simply been allowed the simple justice of being allowed to be exactly who they are.
Yeah.
And that's all any of us ever want to be.
Mic drop. Literally. No, thank you so much for sitting and chatting with me today, and even educating me on some things and what the experience is like. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's something I'm never gonna go through it, but being able to surround myself with people who have gone through those kind of things then educates me into some sort of insight onto what it is to be able to be your true self. You know,
that's the thing, is like, that's the comfortable thing for everybody, is just getting that knowledge, getting that access to it, and knowing where it's coming from, knowing where someone is coming from. It was like you said at the start, we can't all walk a mile in each other's shoes, but we can try.
Yeah.
You know, if we can at least try the laces on. If the shoes don't fit, that's fine. But at least you tried.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. You tried, and you have a little bit more insight than you did before.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really appreciated it, and I've really appreciated just even being able to catch up with you.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah,
I know.
Been lovely.
Next week we're going to be chatting about religion, and I'll be joined with a few other guests who we will hopefully announce later this week. I hope you've all enjoyed sticking with us and chatting about trans rights, and I hope you have a wonderful